Okay, who's the main character in regular show?
I don't know his name.
What does he look like? Because he's a very specific bold color. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you gotta know Webster though.
Everybody in my
not knowing
group.
Webster is like not knowing. Let me give you somebody. Who would Webster be if he was an artist? That's like not knowing. Give me somebody, Mo.
This is not a good example. I'd rather a nigga know Arnold than Webster.
And I know who Arnold is, but
Who's Arnold?
the nigga with the yellow spikes.
No.
Yes,
See?
he is.
Oh my goodness.
Cartoon.
I'm not talking about niggas coming. Y'all might want to transfer out, do what y'all gotta do. Told these niggas it's the first day because they was like, they won one game previously that year and Coach Prime was not gonna let that happen. So he told them straight off, y'all might want to get in the portal. He told the quarterback that shit. I was like, damn, that nigga ruthless. In a good way, because it was a good way to say, you're not going to get any run here. You might as well go figure it out now. I totally get it. But what you just said, Mo, is great too. We're in a situation, right, where young people are not knowing who these older players or older people or older entertainers or any of that is. And so like last year, right, when you first get there, the energy's good. Travis is there. Coach Prime just got there. Shador's there. So you got everybody coming through because there's new energy. You know, I went to a few games last year. I done seen Carmelo Anthony, the Kevin Durant, the Russell Westbrook, everybody was there. Offset was there. And it was just, everybody was there and that kind of died down. Because people don't know, Deion Cole, he was on Drink Champs, shout out to Noriega, Drink Champs and everything. And he made a really good point. Deion Cole's a comedian, really good comedian. And he made a point to where he was at the BET Awards, right? Well, and they got Kai Cenat hosting it or whatever. And Kai Cenat's going around basically brushing off older stars now at the BET Awards. This is where you give awards and flowers to legacy artists or legacy entertainers or legacy athletes to where they've been doing their thing, and you're sitting there saying, this person has put 20 years of music in, this person has put 20 years as an athlete, this person has put 20, 30 years as an entrepreneur, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you got a 21-year-old hosting it, and when he goes around saying, I don't know these niggas, niggas get offended. While they ran down on the nigga. Yo, what the fuck is you doing, my nigga? You trying to play me on Twitch? Fuck you got going on? I'll talk to you later. But to Kai Cenat's point, he don't know these niggas. He took a job. He came to do the job. To me, that's BET's fault. You put him in that position because he's lit, but not recognizing you put him in a position to diss niggas. Because Deion Cole said it wasn't just Wale. He said, Drewski knew who he was. He's like, yo, don't pay him no mind, G. And he said Drewski went up to Kai Cenat and was like, yo, that's the OG Deion Cole. And he was like, all right, what's up? And brushed him off too. You get what I'm saying? When you put people in these positions, they don't know the older artists, athletes, etc. The reason I'm even saying all that, Mo, is to go back to your point on when you said you got somebody in the locker room like Ray Lewis. And the kids probably don't understand what the fuck Ray Lewis about. They don't know the dance. Nigga did the, you know what I'm saying? They don't know all the shit this nigga did, my nigga. You know Ray Lewis dance? Exactly. You know?
I know who Ray Lewis is. I don't know the dance.
Dance is how you can't know Ray Lewis and don't know the dance. You gotta know the dance. Nigga do all type of shit and do some, yo, you gotta know the Ray Lewis dance. But I respect that you don't. But this is what I'm talking about. You want Coach Prime to get niggas down there? Hire a young boy. Hire a young boy. They'll recruit everybody, nigga. Hire a young boy. Niggas will be flocking down there, say young boy coming in 3 games. Niggas will run to sign down there. And I'm being funny, but I'm not.
You're not.
That's what you got to do, because that's the age group you're trying to get.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So I kind of want to add to that because I am like very much a prime example of that. And it's not like I'm trying to be ignorant, and it's not like I'm trying to be disrespectful on purpose, because I think that sometimes people misconstrued like not knowing as far as like you're not willing to learn or you don't want to know. It's just literally different eras, different times.
Yeah.
Some people grew up on things that I didn't grow up same way, that I know of things that y'all might not have grown up with. Like a perfect example, and I'm gonna use one, even though like I do know who Wale is. I love his music, but he didn't in that situation. Me and Sin even argue about cartoons and stuff, and like Cam knows exactly, because I can't even give you an example of the show because I don't even remember what he was saying.
Sin was mad. Me and Sin had a bet, and we called Stat on the 3-way, and Sin was mad that she didn't know who Alf was. He caught a whole attitude. Then he got mad because she never heard of Webster. And so I bet him every person he named. I said,
you gotta know
why should she know who Webster is? That's why I won the bet. Stat is born in 2001. Webster came out in 1984. Like, how would niggas know? See, the reason why niggas like me, Murder, and even Mo to a certain extent, even though we a little older than Mo, the reason we know certain shit like Dennis the Menace or Dallas or the Beverly Hillbillies, because we only had 13 channels. We didn't have 1,000 channels. We ain't have no fucking apps. We had to watch what was available to us. We didn't have a CD player in the beginning. We didn't have a tape. You turn the radio on, whatever's on the radio's on. Whatever's on NBC Thursday night, that's what's on NBC Thursday night. These kids got options.
A lot.
So my TV right now got 4,000 channels.
Yeah.
Like, yo, how the fuck she supposed to know Webster and Alf? And what was the last one? I don't think it's Punk.
Killer. She's
no, it was the
Cosby
Cosby Show. He was asking me about.
Do she know little Rudy from the Cosby Show? He said the only nigga I know in the Cosby Show is Bill.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Like, Mace, let me ask you a question. Why should she know Webster?
Black boy.
What? That doesn't even make sense. That doesn't even. I could list 5 TV shows right now that you
should know
never,
black people.
No,
you should know your black history.
I could list 5 TV shows right now that you've probably never seen or heard of in your life.
Are they black people?
Yes, and they're cartoons.
Who?
You do know Regular Show?
You don't know Chowder?
I know Regular Show.
Okay, who's the main character in Regular Show?
I don't know his name.
What does he look like? Because he's a very specific bold color. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you gotta know Webster though.
Everybody in my
not knowing
group.
Webster is like not knowing. Let me give you somebody. Who would Webster be if he was an artist? That's like not knowing. Give me somebody, Mo.
This is not a good example. I'd rather a nigga know Arnold than Webster.
And I know who Arnold is, but
who's Arnold?
The nigga with the yellow spikes.
No.
Yes,
See?
he is.
Oh my
cartoon.
I'm not talking about that.
Oh, well then I don't.
I'm talking about Arnold from Different Strokes Sports.
Oh, I definitely don't know that. I was like, Arnold, I know, like Rugrats, like
what I'm saying
all
is,
that group.
The reason I compared them to Webster, they too short people that never grew. They played kid characters, but they never grew. Nigga, yo, Murder, nigga Sin said, so you don't know the nigga that Michael Jackson used to be caught carrying around. He's talking about Webster. Yo, Stat said, I know the monkey.
Oh my God.
These young people so disrespectful.
It's not disrespectful. When I grew up watching TV and I seen even the late show, because I was even telling Cam a lot of things I wasn't even allowed to watch because it was inappropriate. Like my parents didn't let me watch curse words and stuff like that.
Yo, Murder,
Like,
she couldn't watch Ted when it first came out.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's
almost like when young guys be talking to Charles Barkley crazy. It's the same kind of thing for me. It's like, nigga, that's Sir Charles, man.
And I could see how it's viewed that way, but we're consuming so many different things and there's like overconsumption. You cannot expect me to know every single thing that's going on that y'all grew up with, because like Cam kind of said, you guys had it on display. I would have to go back and you have to find reruns. Like they're not even playing the same SpongeBob episodes.
You know who
that
Martin
they started out
is,
with.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, you good.
But I didn't watch that. Like that wasn't for me.
But
that wasn't
you know
my
who
time.
it is.
Yeah, I've seen the show, but I've never watched it.
See,
like
Martin's
I couldn't
different.
tell you
Martin's
what.
and Bad Boys. Like Martin stayed relevant. Webster been missing since Webster.
Yeah.
Like Nick, you know Webster?
He doesn't
Nick
either.
don't know Webster.
Nick doesn't know Webster.
Yo, Mo, you know Webster?
Al Bundy? Nick knows Al Bundy?
I don't know.
Yeah, I would have bet that Nick knew who Webster was, though.
Nick is from fucking Spain or something. Nick is over there from Greece. He don't know that shit. He just learned English like 7 years ago,
That's
bro.
crazy.
There's only 2 black shows that I know, and it's like my parents would have to force it on. I couldn't tell you which was literally Homie the Clown and In Living Color, and I didn't grow up watching those. That's the only 2 I can
Okay, you saved yourself.
save myself.
But Stat,
you saved it.
No, it's crazy. Sin lost mad bets. The nigga Mo, not to cut you off, this is the last word I want to say. Nigga Sin lost about $42 in 6 different bets. She said she gotta know who Rakim is. I said she's not gonna know who Rakim is. We call Stat. He said, what you think when I say Eric B? She said, I don't know. She said, you know who Rakim is? She said, no. Then he gets mad at her for not knowing this shit. And then Stat asks her parents, and then her parents say, yeah, that was my favorite group growing up.
Yeah, literally. I'm like, y'all.
Listen, let me tell you something.
Yeah, I see why they mad with her.
But this is what I'm gonna say.
She should know this.
But this is what I'm gonna say. My favorite group would never be my mother's favorite group. That's just me.
But you should know your mother's favorite group.
Nah, Murder. I just think that you don't realize the options that these kids have.
No, I know. I'm saying, like, you knew your mother's favorite group. Like, I know my mother's favorite group.
I don't know my mother's favorite group. Well, I didn't listen to a lot of music. The only time I really listened to music in the East Side Blood House. My house was not really a music house.
Different lives. So, Maurice, you had a quick take before we wrap.
Yeah, no, it was just in reference to the Deion Cole interview. I seen the clips he was talking about, and just to clarify, he was really. I think like once you find out who somebody is, and I think how you go about just even showing basic respect and just like being dismissive, I think he was talking more about that, and I do agree with him with that. Like, you know, once somebody's done something of significance that really people don't do every day. And you're at a show honoring people, you know that these people who walking down this red carpet or these people moving in these places that are secluded, there's somebody. So I think that it's a basic etiquette that he was saying that you should have. And so that was my interpretation of it.
Really quick though, I will say sometimes it's hard to navigate that because if there's so many, obviously if there's maybe 2 or 3 people, you should do your due diligence, which is something that I try really hard to do because I never want to come across as disrespectful because I know I'm around, you know, like people who have been doing their thing forever, legends, all that. But sometimes in a space, especially if you're younger, you can't go up and ask somebody like, is that, like, you kind of have to be able to fall on the ropes and fall in line. So in every case, that is not an option.
He's talking about the disregard though. You know, the disregard for is like when you find out who the person is, is the attitude that you keep after you find out who he is. So the whole fact of not knowing, not knowing who a person is, that's just willful ignorance. But once you know who this person is, to act like they're not important is what he's talking about. And young people do that because we was all young at one time. Somebody be like, yo, there goes such and such. You know how we would be, Killer.
You do it now.
Amen. And on that note, unless you got a final word, Dr. Betha.
You're right. That's how I know what he's talking about.
There's y'all's answer.
All right. So this clip has been running through my mind ever since I first watched it. Because it's one of those moments where you watch a group of grown adults, people who are...
Okay, so this clip has been stuck in my head ever since I watched it because it captures one of those moments where you see a bunch of grown people, folks who are supposed to be close and completely tapped into the same culture, suddenly realize just how enormous the generational divide really is. And trust me, we're not talking about some tiny difference in age here. We're talking about a straight-up canyon. A canyon so massive that one group is referencing things from 3 or 4 decades ago, while the other side is staring back like somebody just started speaking an entirely different language. That's exactly the energy that unfolded during this podcast segment. And by the time the conversation wrapped up, Cameron and the rest of the crew were completely stunned by the things Stat had absolutely no clue about. But before we jump into the wildest part, we have to rewind a little, because this conversation didn't actually begin with classic television or legendary rap groups. It started with football. More specifically, it started with Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, and the culture he created after arriving at a college program that had managed to win just one game the season before he showed up. Think about that for a moment. This was a program that had practically disappeared from the national conversation, a team that most people outside its own state probably couldn't have cared less about. Then suddenly, one of the most accomplished and outspoken personalities sports has ever produced walks through the door carrying himself like he already owns the building. And on his very first day, he looked around that locker room and essentially told the players to their faces that if winning and greatness weren't what they wanted, they needed to start considering other schools immediately. There was no soft introduction, no hand-holding. He even told the quarterback flat out that competition was coming, and if the possibility of competing for his position made him uncomfortable, then he needed to start preparing himself for life somewhere else. Now, one of the podcast hosts brought that story up almost as a compliment, basically saying, yes, that's ruthless, but there's a difference between being ruthless and simply being disrespectful. In this case, the point was that the harshness had a purpose. It forced people to either step up when the pressure arrived or move out of the way. And that little observation ended up opening the door to a much bigger conversation, because suddenly the topic wasn't football anymore. It became this larger question of whether younger people today, and when we say young, we're talking about people in their late teens and early 20s, genuinely recognize the older athletes, entertainers, and cultural icons who helped shape the world they're living in now. One of the hosts explained that when this football program first exploded onto the scene and Coach Prime had everybody talking, the sidelines were loaded with famous faces. We're talking former MVPs, legendary players, musicians, and all kinds of major celebrities showing up simply because they wanted to be around the moment. But once that initial hype started wearing off, a lot of those famous faces stopped appearing as often because a large portion of the audience, particularly younger fans, didn't even know who many of those legendary people were. That stadium atmosphere that had once been filled with recognizable stars slowly started disappearing, and it wasn't necessarily because the program had suddenly become less interesting. It was because the novelty surrounding those legacy names wasn't hitting the same way once the excitement of something new began to fade. And that exact observation eventually connected to a story involving the BET Awards, which might honestly be the part of this entire clip that gets people talking the most. So here's where things get interesting. A well-known comedian appeared on a popular interview podcast and explained something about a younger co-host who had been brought in to help present awards that year. The problem wasn't simply that the younger host didn't recognize every older legend walking across the red carpet, because realistically, that can happen. The bigger issue, according to the comedian, was how that person responded after being told exactly who those legends were. Instead of immediately showing respect after learning they were standing in front of people who had spent decades building careers in music, movies, sports, or business, the reaction came across as almost completely dismissive. It was almost like those accomplishments meant nothing, like someone's achievements somehow became less important simply because they happened before this younger person's own cultural awareness began. And naturally, social media went crazy over it. A lot of people felt the comedian was exposing a serious lack of respect, and honestly, he was making that point. But he also explained that putting all the blame on the younger co-host wasn't exactly fair. If anything, he argued that the event organizers deserved a major portion of the criticism for putting somebody in that environment without properly preparing them. They should have explained exactly who these people were and why those names mattered before sending them out there. You can't hand somebody a microphone, put them directly in front of cultural legends, and then expect them to magically understand decades of history that nobody ever bothered to teach them. So, that's the setup. That's basically the appetizer before we get to the part that made this conversation completely take off. Because one of the podcast hosts decided to turn the spotlight inward, literally pointing toward their own co-host, someone the crew calls Stat, who suddenly became the perfect real-life example of this exact generational disconnect. And to Stat's credit, she didn't get defensive about it. Instead, she completely embraced the conversation and basically explained, "Look, it's not that I'm intentionally trying to be uninformed. It's not that I don't want to learn. We simply grew up in different eras, and people absorb completely different things depending on when and where they were raised." Stat even talked about having disagreements with another co-host over cartoons, specifically old cartoons. The references simply weren't part of her childhood because she was born in a completely different decade. But then the story took a very unexpected turn. Apparently, there was actually money involved. A real bet, real cash was on the line. And somehow the entire thing came from a phone call. Stat was put on the spot during a three-way conversation and asked directly whether she knew a particular legendary hip-hop artist. When she admitted that she wasn't sure who they were, everybody's reaction was basically disbelief. But they weren't finished. They threw another huge name from that same generation of hip-hop at her, and once again she had absolutely no idea, no recognition at all. And just when everyone thought the situation couldn't possibly get any crazier, they decided to call her parents to verify it for themselves. And wouldn't you know it, her own mother confirmed that the exact same artist was actually one of her favorite artists growing up. At that point, the whole room completely lost it, because this wasn't simply an older generation failing to connect with Stat anymore. This was evidence that the information had somehow skipped an entire generation inside her own family. And from there, the conversation somehow became even more hilarious, because after the bet was finally settled and the money was handed over, everybody moved on to television. We're talking old-school cable classics, the kind of shows that helped define an entire period of Black culture, while also becoming part of mainstream American culture. And this is where Cameron genuinely could not believe the answers coming out of Stat's mouth. It began pretty harmlessly. Someone mentioned an iconic sitcom from the 1980s centered around a young boy with an instantly recognizable appearance, a character who became such a major part of pop culture that his name alone eventually became shorthand for an entire style of comedic character. And Stat had absolutely no idea who they were talking about. Nothing, no recognition whatsoever, just that completely blank expression. The kind of look that makes people who grew up loving that character suddenly realize that time has really moved forward without asking anybody's permission. But the madness didn't end with that one reference, because once the first name completely missed, the crew started throwing out even more classic television references to find out just how deep this generational gap actually went. They brought up another legendary sitcom, this one involving an alien character living with a suburban family, also from that same era of television, and once again, Stat had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. At this point, one of the hosts jokingly threw his hands in the air like Stat had just committed some kind of unforgivable offense against cultural history. Then they decided to go even deeper into the past, bringing up a legendary family sitcom that is widely remembered as one of the most successful and influential shows ever, centered around a Black family on network television. And when they started testing Stat on individual characters from the series, including one of the younger daughters, the only name she could confidently come up with was the family's patriarch, the biggest star of the entire show, and probably the one character almost everyone recognizes, regardless of age, because of how massive that actor eventually became. At that point, one of the hosts jokingly, although there was definitely some seriousness underneath it, brought race into the discussion, basically arguing that these were culturally important Black sitcoms and that everyone should have at least some basic knowledge of them, almost like there should be a required history class for understanding where Black television came from. But then another host immediately challenged that argument and pointed out something important. This works both ways. He started naming newer animated shows created for younger audiences, including shows with Black characters and Black creators, and then asked the older hosts if they knew any of those references. And guess what? They didn't. They couldn't identify the characters, they couldn't explain the storylines, they were just as confused as Stat had been a few minutes earlier. And honestly, that may have been one of the smartest moments in the entire conversation, because it completely changed the way you looked at the argument. The issue isn't simply that young people don't know older culture. Older people can be just as disconnected from the culture that younger generations grew up with. Nobody has a complete map of everybody else's cultural timeline, and expecting one generation to perfectly understand every reference from another generation is probably an impossible standard. But that realization didn't stop the jokes, because the crew immediately pulled out another classic sitcom from the 1980s, this time featuring two brothers who looked completely different, with one being noticeably shorter and younger looking than the other. And once again, Stat had absolutely nothing. No answer, no recognition, nothing. And at that point, one of the hosts made a hilarious comparison, joking that both this character and the previously mentioned alien character had the same strange quality of portraying children while clearly not looking or aging like normal kids, almost as if both characters had somehow been trapped inside a permanent time loop, which, when you really think about it, is actually a pretty perfect description of both characters. Then, somebody introduced another piece of famous pop culture trivia involving one of the biggest musicians ever, someone who famously kept a very young celebrity around him during one of the strangest chapters of his career. And once again, Stat didn't have the full story, only recognizing the most superficial part of the reference without knowing the actual name or the history behind it. By this point, everybody in the room was laughing and shaking their heads, but you could also tell they were legitimately shocked at how many references were going completely over her head. And when they started asking other members of the crew who were actually closer to Stat's age, they discovered that some of them didn't know these references either. So clearly, this wasn't just one person being disconnected from pop culture, because the more they tested people, the more obvious it became that this was genuinely a generational issue rather than one individual's lack of knowledge. Stat then tried to explain where she was coming from, and honestly, once you actually hear her reasoning, it makes a lot more sense than people might initially expect. She explained that growing up, she wasn't limited to whatever happened to be playing on network television, because that was all there was to watch. She grew up in a world of endless choices, streaming platforms, on-demand programming, thousands of channels, and countless apps, all fighting for the same few minutes of your attention. Meanwhile, when the older hosts were children, there were only a small number of channels available. So if a particular show came on at a particular time, that was basically what you watched, because there weren't many other options. If your favorite program aired Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, you watched it Tuesday night at 8 o'clock, because the alternative might have been static, something you had already watched, or simply nothing worth watching at all. Now, compare that with the way people consume entertainment today, where someone can spend 20 minutes scrolling through an endless catalog without even choosing something, because there is simply too much content available at any given moment. And that argument actually connected with some of the older hosts, because even if they didn't want to completely admit it, they acknowledged that there is something real about the problem of media overconsumption today. It is genuinely difficult to expect someone to know decades worth of cultural history when that same person is being hit with brand new content every single day, sometimes every single hour. This isn't automatically about being disrespectful or uninformed. Sometimes it's simply about the overwhelming amount of entertainment competing for a person's limited attention. There was also a fascinating side conversation about how this exact problem affects older public figures, especially athletes, who can sometimes get treated dismissively by younger fans or commentators who simply don't carry the same level of respect for their accomplishments because they never watched that athlete dominate the sport while it was happening. It's really the same problem showing up in another part of culture. Respect is often built through shared experiences and memories, and when those memories aren't shared because two people were born decades apart, that emotional connection doesn't automatically appear just because someone says it should. Eventually, the conversation started coming back toward the main point, and one of the hosts made what I honestly think was the most important observation of the entire segment. He explained that simply not knowing who someone is isn't necessarily the real problem. Nobody expects every person to have an encyclopedia in their head, filled with every athlete, entertainer, musician, or cultural figure who existed before they were born. The real issue begins after you learn who that person is and then deliberately decide that their accomplishments don't matter. That's where simple ignorance turns into willful ignorance. That's where not knowing becomes disrespect. If you've never heard of someone before, that's understandable, especially when different generations have grown up consuming completely different forms of media. But once somebody explains the person's legacy to you, brushing it off like it means nothing is an entirely different situation. And that is really why this clip connected with so many people once it started making the rounds. The conversation isn't actually about whether Stat knew a particular sitcom character or recognized a certain rap group from the 1980s. It's about a much bigger cultural argument that is happening everywhere, across sports, music, entertainment, social media, workplaces, and even family dinner tables, where older generations sometimes feel like the things that shaped their lives are being forgotten, while younger generations feel like they're constantly being criticized for not knowing things from a media world they never experienced. And let's be honest, the environment they grew up in genuinely wasn't the same one their parents or older siblings experienced. Cameron, meanwhile, spent most of this entire exchange laughing in disbelief as he kept throwing out reference after reference, hoping that eventually something would trigger recognition, only to keep getting absolutely nothing back. And by the time the conversation ended, it didn't really seem like he was angry at all. He seemed genuinely amazed, almost in that strange way where you suddenly realize you're older than you thought you were, because things that feel like basic common knowledge to you can actually be ancient history to somebody who wasn't even alive when those shows originally aired. And honestly, that's probably what makes this clip so entertaining in the first place. It's hilarious, it's messy, and somehow there's actual money involved because of a completely ridiculous bet. But underneath all those jokes and shocked reactions, there's something surprisingly relatable happening here. Pretty much everyone has experienced that moment when you mention something you assume is universal knowledge, only to get hit with that completely empty stare from somebody younger. And sometimes it's not even about age, because you can meet someone older who somehow never came across that particular movie, show, song, athlete, or cultural moment either. When you really step back, this entire segment becomes a surprisingly accurate snapshot of the much bigger generational argument happening all over the internet right now. It's old versus new, nostalgia versus relevance, shared cultural memories versus personalized entertainment. And honestly, neither generation is necessarily the villain here. It's simply the result of how dramatically the media world has transformed over the last few decades. What was once a shared experience, where millions of people watched the same handful of programs because those were basically the only choices, has turned into a completely personalized media universe, where two people born just 10 or 20 years apart can grow up with almost none of the same cultural references. So yes, Cameron was shocked, the rest of the crew was shocked too, but once you actually understand why Stat didn't recognize all those references, the situation starts making a lot more sense. It's not automatically ignorance, it's not automatically disrespectful. Sometimes it's simply different generations, different access to entertainment, and completely different ideas about what you were expected to watch versus what you could easily skip. And honestly, that may be the biggest lesson hidden inside this entire hilarious conversation. Before deciding that somebody is culturally clueless because they don't recognize a particular reference, maybe we should first ask what era they grew up in and what kind of media was actually available to them, instead of immediately assuming they intentionally ignored an important part of culture. And that's really what this viral moment is all about. The more you think about it, the more ridiculous it becomes, but at the same time, the more it actually makes you think. If you enjoyed breaking this one down with me, drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me which classic show you believe should be mandatory knowledge for everybody, regardless of what generation they come from.